We're going to get the evening program off to, I think, a really beautiful start with a short presentation by one of I think, the world's greatest environmental photographers. We have him for years. He always has beautiful photographs that you've seen running on the slides at different times during this conference, and for those of you who've been to prior conferences, you've seen them. And so when he said he would be here, we sort of just found any time we could find on the program to fit in a chance for him to present his images. So without further ado, Gary Braasch.
You have it set up? We don't need the lights off. Yeah, we don't need the lights at all.
Great.
So, wow. Well, thank you. Great introduction, and very, very happy to be here. I think we were going to get the lights lowered, but I'm going to get started here. I very much appreciate the chance to make a direct contribution to this great meeting. I've been covering climate change for 15 years now. Looking back, this story appeared in 1999 in Discover magazine about Antarctic climate science. And just a couple weeks ago, on the cover of the New York Times magazine, photographs about Shell Oil's drilling fiasco in the Arctic. This story is now resonating a lot because the president just proposed wilderness designation for the Alaska coast that this drill rig was so very close to. And the pictures illustrate the meaning of my project. My vision was to report on climate change by making global warming visible, to show the reality of climate change effects, not as predictions, not as paperwork and graphs, but as happening now. And increasingly, not only to reveal the causes and what's happening to society because of our energy choices, but also to help people see the future with clean energy. And from the very beginning, it was individuals who energized me. I was very lucky to come under the wing of Steve Schneider, for example. This is a picture of him in Copenhagen, one of the last pictures I made of him. Also, others like Ray Bradley, Peter Raven, Tom Lovejoy have guided my project. They set me on the path to first seek out the field scientists and the actual eyewitnesses to climate change. And so I want to show tonight a few of the individuals that have been inspirations to me in this project. For example, in Antarctica, Bill Fraser. He's an ornithologist, ecologist. He was one of my first mentors in climate science. He epitomizes the incredible work of field scientists. Year after year, day after day, long months in the field. He's been doing it for 40 years now, observing and counting and building a record of the Adelie penguins in the Antarctic Peninsula and how they are affected by the 6 degrees of warming down there on the peninsula. His equal far to the north is George DeVoke, another ornithologist who works out of a tiny hut on a barren island north of Alaska, north of the Arctic Circle. He studies black guillemot seabirds. George's observations, also for 4 decades, show that, like the penguins down south, they can't get enough food under the melting, retreating polar sea ice. It's this kind of steady record-keeping by scientists all over the world that tells us what we know, how we know about climate change. The entire ecosystem of the Arctic is being disrupted, but others in the north, of course, have other ways of knowing this. This native village in Alaska, Shishmaref, has lost up to 60 feet a year because of thawing sea ice and the melting of the permafrost. I was out on a boat with Tony Wairana, who's one of the leaders to help them cope with this, showing me with his oar where his family home was when he was a boy 30 years before. This Inupiat village is going to move inland, away from their traditional oceanside seal hunting area. They have a site, but it's been years of planning, and they still don't have the money to do it. Native cultures across the Arctic are threatened by loss of ice and by the warming of the tundra. This is Elisipi Ilushitak, an elder on Baffin Island. She can point to pictures showing how many clothes that her family had to wear in the summer when she was a young mother. But now, it's T-shirts. Arctic cultures all over the world are feeling the heat of climate change, even though they make very little global warming pollution. We know about the amount of pollution because of the summit of Mauna Loa, where NOAA and Scripps measure CO2 every day. This is where Charles Keeling started his measurements in the 1950s of daily CO2 amounts in the atmosphere, and we know there how widespread and how the amount of CO2 has been increasing. My partner, scientist Joan Rothlein, and I were there about 3 years ago, and the observing scientist John Barnes captured a bit of that day's air in a vial. The concentration that day was about 392 parts per million. As you know, we're now over 400, and it's rising without any apparent abatement. The other thing we know about CO2 is that what happens in Hawaii doesn't stay in Hawaii. For example, this is the tropical forest of Manu National Park in Peru, one of the most protected rainforests in the entire world, and you'd think it would be immune to climate changes. But the warming temperature of the atmosphere here is pervasive. It can't be excluded like logging can and like mining can. And so the trees here are actually starting to move and make their way up the slopes to cooler territory in order to keep within their habitat. We know this. In fact, the amount of motion for these trees is as much as 2 meters a year. We owe this knowledge to the patient measurements of ecologists Ken Feely and Miles Silman. They and their Peruvian colleagues have measured and taken pictures of more than 14,000 trees, and they can tell how much the trees are growing each year and keep track of individuals throughout the entire slope of the park. They document that seeds are more successful upslope, that mature trees grow much faster when they're in the right climate spot, and old trees die out below without being replaced. It's not quite like Macbeth or Lord of the Rings when you think about forests moving, but they are rising up the slopes of this tropical forest. In another part of the world, when I set out to photograph the receding glacier that's the source of the sacred Ganges River, I met this man, Swami Sundaranda. He's a sadhu, a mountaineer, and actually one of the best photographers in the Himalayas. They call him the Ansel Adams of the Himalayas. As he showed some of his photographs and I showed mine, he understood exactly what I was doing with my project. He was passionate about the changes that he had seen in 40 years in the Himalayas, lamenting the population change and the growth of cities. But more than that, I got from him and felt in him the spirit of the river and the spirit of the mountains. And so when I got to this glacier, the face of the sacred face where the glacier the water flows out underneath the glacier as a whole river, I felt the power of this even stronger because of the information I'd gotten from the sadhu. This is one of the sacred places where the Ganges water flows right out from a fast receding glacier wall of ice. Melting glaciers, of course, and the fact that the ocean itself is warming is creating sea level rise, one of the most obvious and pervasive changes for climate. The young Bangladeshi, M.A. Mohit here, guided me to his family home downriver from Dhaka, where unpredictable erosion on higher tides has washed away about 6 kilometers of village land and rice paddies. These people are rice fishers, rice growing people and fishers. Like most people on the planet, they are not very wealthy and they do not create very much global warming pollution. And yet they are literally and actually on the edge. It takes one American makes as much pollution in terms of climate change as 75 people in Bangladesh. But these people are very much at the mercy of oncoming climate change and the expected 1 meter rise of sea level. Bangladesh is the largest country affected so much by sea level. The smallest is Tuvalu in the South Pacific, where all 12,000 inhabitants live no more than 4 meters above the sea. This is brother and sister Falabak and Mir and one of their cousins. They're allowing me to photograph them as a very high tide just rose up under their house. This was in 2005. Subsequent visits, I've learned from their family and from the people in the village how serious it is to be continued living there when salt water periodically comes into their gardens and poisons their plants and is even starting to get into their fresh water supply. We also met on Tuvalu a couple of scientists, Paul Kench and Susan Owen on the right, an example of scientists who are actively helping people adapt and get ready for climate change. They're using surveying and modern Google mapping to help the Tuvaluan people understand which houses are most at risk and what the best thing is to do to survive oncoming tides. In Nepal, Joan and I learned of adaptation and inspiration from this woman, Milpayamo Tamang, who's a single mom and a farmer. She bought 1,500 strawberry seedlings in Kathmandu, brought them 70 miles up to the ridge of land that she owns, and planted them with some help from the World Wildlife Fund for the plastic, and she's watering them from tanks that she dug with her friends to collect rainwater. This she was able to do because her valley is warmer, and now she's established the first commercial berry field in this part of Nepal. In other parts of the Himalayas, people are planting and developing new apple trees and pear trees for warming climates. And underneath these orchards, they're using cover crops of peas for both saving water and also for food. We also witnessed success measured in clean kitchens and growing forests and less pollution. This is the Nepalese village newly fitted out with biogas generators. The woman here is Sangata Gali. She's a mom again, and she's the leader in this village where they take all the waste, human as well as animal, and put it in a digester and get biogas out. She is so ecstatic to have escaped the smoky fires of all of the rest of her life. But around the world, of course, as many of us know, and which we've talked about a bit at this convention here, open biomass and coal fires are not only stoking global warming, but are poisoning the health of 3 billion people around the world. There's much work to be done in this. Everywhere one looks, amid all the problems, individuals are changing their villages, their neighborhoods, entire nations because of their energy and leadership, with a lot of help increasingly from groups, NGOs, and governments. In Kiribati, this is a picture made at dusk. A village is switching over from noisy, polluting kerosene generators to even single or double solar panels connected to a battery and a single light bulb so they can work, study, read into the night. This village needs a lot more solar panels. This is one of the ways we start, but clearly this entire society and southern climes could be run with solar power. Everywhere one looks, you see a lot of this, but the much larger scale we've seen in Germany just this past summer. It became real for us when we passed these Bavarian villages, farmhouses and milking parlors, but also offices, sheds, and schools, almost totally covered by solar panels. We seldom see such a coverage in parts of the U.S. This farming town also uses farm waste biogas and has 7 wind turbines and can create sometimes 3 times the power that they need, and then because of German law, they get to sell it back to the government. The mayor, the deputy mayor, his name is Gunther Mogely, said that this village of 2,500 decided to do this mostly to save money, encouraged by the federal German law that is transforming the German system and, of course, causing a lot of disruption among traditional central power stations. The solar roof coverage of this village is actually only 37%, but he says now that it's been proven, everybody wants to join in. Generating more from the sun directly is only one way for us to get to the needed 80% or more non-carbon energy. This is the classroom of Bertha Vasquez in Coral Gables, Florida. She got her students interested in math by having them look at their electric bills. But they got the idea about conservation and energy savings. The kids took it from there. They saw many ways to reduce power in their school. This is Bertha on the white painted roof, part of a school-wide program to save energy, turn off computers, use open windows instead of air conditioning and so forth, that saved about $30,000 in the first year and is now a model for many, many schools. Everywhere you look in the U.S., people are beginning to catch on and save energy and become part of this great revolution. Ranchers are now wind farmers in Texas. Homeowners are rebuilding to higher standards after Sandy. Architects are trying out combinations of efficiencies, not only just solar panels and efficient buildings, but also wind turbines. Architects, scientists, and engineers are pushing the boundaries of renewable energy in Colorado. And everywhere, schoolyards are being transformed into gardens by the kids. But children born today may see in their lifetimes physical changes to their planet that in previous geologic eras occurred over hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years. Some of these changes are now set in motion, thanks to the world's collective inaction on climate. But we can't allow climate disruption to steal the future that we know is there, the tomorrow that we want and that we deserve. We are all children of climate change. We are all heirs to our energy choices. Yet we are also active, intelligent, insistent, and smart enough to demand a cooler world of tomorrow. That world's already here. Iowa, for example, now gets more than a quarter of its energy throughout the year from wind turbines. And this is a rebuilt part of the 9th Ward in New Orleans. Looks a little bit more like Germany than we've ever seen before in the U.S. This is the example now of where we want to go. It's not going to be easy, as we've been learning today, but this is a reality that we're talking about a place where we will get energy, build, cook, manufacture, go to school, and regain the health and strength of our communities in a cooler world and a cleaner world. And I particularly thank you for your individual brilliance and your efforts here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to show these pictures. And thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
So if it's not out of place, we are an independent project, a scientist and a photojournalist, and we are looking for collaborations and places to publish and so on, and happy to talk to anybody about how our work can reach more people and how we can find more subjects. Thanks.